choose that one?
Because it's not just something that's impacted Canadians here, folks in Ottawa, but this was something that people around the world were paying attention to. Everyone was wondering what was going on here in Wellington Street and what was going on in Canada with these drones.
Competency-based interview questions will usually start off with either, tell me about a time when you, describe a situation you were in where
military dictatorship. A 19-and-a-half-year-old sergeant chooses a random house. You wake up the family, search the place. You can yourself imagine how does it feel when a military unit enters your house 2 o'clock?
We're very focused on cybersecurity resilient systems.
Okay, and so in that sense, whether it's deterrence, defense, or counterattacks, we're hearing a lot.
That's the impact that those tagging. But we're tarnishing our reputation as a country that is always welcoming and has a compassion and
The future of undersea hegemony will not be decided by naval clashes, but by the quiet application of administrative law on the ocean floor. To block a rival's subsea cables, a state does not need to deploy naval forces. Instead, they can utilize domestic, environmental regulations as a highly effective bureaucratic barrier.
have a teacher interview coming up soon for any school, college or university. Watch this interview from start to finish because it's going to help you be the standout candidate at your own teacher interview.
This strategic use of, for modern states, blocking a rival's digital pipeline does not require military force. Instead, a targeted bureaucratic delay can easily achieve the same objective.
Time weren't perceived as terrorists or called terrorists. That word came about after 9/11. Before then, such groups were seen as freedom fighters. While the government, for example, in the context of Afghanistan and while fighting in the context of the Cold War, supported such groups within Afghanistan. Even at that time, mine and my mother's and my party's position was
claiming environmental sensitivity at precise coordinates acts as a passive blockade, halting data corridor expansion without triggering a diplomatic crisis. When defending these restrictive regulations, state representatives often rely on formal narratives that dismiss any accusations of geopolitical bias.
Well, first, the notion or the axiom that the so-called Taliban is made up of foreigners, locals and foreigners, is incorrect. And the notion that we are a threat to international security is incorrect. It has no basis. It has no evidence to back it up.
By firmly denying any hidden strategic motives, governments maintain their environmental credentials while keeping rival cable projects completely stalled. The high-stakes nature of undersea infrastructure often leads to intense covert struggles, where those who expose these regulatory aims face extreme risks.
One of the best investigative journalists in Pakistan, Arshad Sharif, he was assassinated in Kenya just a couple of weeks back. This guy was exposing this whole plot that took place against me. That he was hounded out of Pakistan. He ended up going to Dubai. From there, he went to Kenya, where he was killed.
The silencing of investigators highlights just how far states will go to protect their undersea monopolies and maritime intelligence operations. To establish an undersea data monopoly, host nations can selectively apply environmental laws to block competitor access to key landing zones.
This morning, it's very clear that the government, the current government, has actually blocked the citizens from voting in the most popular areas, for example, in Santiago de Cuba, which is very left-leaning. How do they do that? By refusing to offer the transportation and the buses as it was agreed upon.
By withholding necessary permits under the guise of eco-preservation, governments achieve targeted exclusion without declaring a physical blockade. to justify blocking the rival Subsea cable, regulators must carefully document specific environmental criteria to prove compliance with ecological laws.
Competency-based interview questions will usually start off with either, tell me about a time when you, describe a situation you were in where you had to, and finally, give an example of a time when you. So you can see that the interview question is asking you to give a specific situation you have previously been in that demonstrates the competency being assessed.
Establishing these strict competency-like benchmarks ensures that the regulatory rejection appears objective and completely standard to outside observers. Behind closed doors, high-level negotiations often occur as states attempt to navigate the complex financial and political fallout of cable delays.
That his Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, was at the center of these negotiations. He was on the phone calls with members of the House of Representatives, Republicans, urging them to vote for the $600 relief a week ago. And now the president is calling for this $2,000 relief, which complicates virtually everything Republicans in the Senate want to do and certainly complicates the Georgia specials.
Introducing sudden regulatory requirements complicates these deals, giving hosts nations the leverage they need to protect their own networks. Governments seek to integrate subsea cables into highly controlled corridors, framing these restrictions as crucial steps for marine conservation.
Aligns perfectly, as this digital public good, which helps to tie together a number of these foundational building blocks like accounts, like payments, like digital ID. So this session, is aiming to educate the community on what's being brought forward here and allow you to, identify opportunities that you can become involved, as I think it's a space that, is very needed and others in the FINRAC community aren't active about this ongoing effort.
This aligns national surveillance goals with public-facing environmental initiatives, creating a secure and heavily monitored digital choke point when legal disputes arise over blocked subsea cables. States defend their actions by pointing strictly to established environmental statutes.
The question isn't whether the government or the court will do anything about that. The question before the court is whether the legislative remedies that are put forward to help these people are constitutional. It's a different set of questions. The Supreme Court is not a public charity or a foundation. The Supreme Court decides on constitutionality. She had to keep reminding that. And the other thing, which is very interesting, Amara said it's a foregone conclusion.
By focusing solely on the legality of ecological protection, courts rarely address the underlying geopolitical containment strategies. At the shoreline landing stations, host nations can enforce round-the-clock environmental monitoring, treating any unauthorized access as a security breach.
Military dictatorship. A 19-and-a-half-year-old sergeant chooses a random house. You wake up the family, search the place. You can yourself imagine how does it feel when a military unit enters your house 2 o'clock in the morning, tearing apart the place, finishing, go out to the street, knock on some doors, make some noise, run to the other corner of the street, and then another random house. And that's basically how we pass our 8-hour shift. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
This continuous administrative surveillance ensures that rival operators are kept under constant, high-pressure oversight by advocating for a total freeze on new underwater industrial infrastructure. States can legally prevent adversaries from expanding their networks.
Really should be doing is get out of fossil fuels. That means coal, oil and gas, and not be expanding any of that infrastructure. And there's really no way we can geoengineer our way out of the climate crisis.
Some of our guests are nodding their heads, some of our guests are shaking their heads. Let the debate begin.
This environmental push effectively locks the seabed in its current state, blocking any new competitor installations. This selective regulatory control demonstrates how environmental policy is ultimately an exercise of sovereign state power.
Devolution emphasizes that it is not a power.
By determining who gets green permits, governments decide which alliances control the physical layout. The global internet. States warn that laying heavy-duty telecom equipment in sensitive marine areas carries severe long-term ecological risks.
If you fire at a tanker which is laden with oil, the risks of an environmental catastrophe are huge.
Using the threat of potential ecological disasters allows governments to legally bar foreign maintenance vessels from sensitive waters. To build a resilient network, states must not only secure their cyber defenses, but also ensure their physical repair. Fleets can operate freely.
Working in terms of strengthening their counterattack systems.
We're very focused on cybersecurity resilient systems.
Okay, and so in that sense, whether it's deterrence, defense, or counterattacks, we're hearing a lot about this volunteer hackers called the Ukrainian IT army, right?
Restricting these maintenance vessels under ecological pretexts quietly degrades a competitor's network resilience over time. Governments leverage local maritime heritage and conservation culture to broad public support for marine sanctuaries.
Continuing to be a very important part of our culture. We think of the town of Nacelle that has so many folks of Finnish ancestry, that has the famous Finn Fest, perhaps you can come to the Finn Fest someday, that attracts thousands to enjoy our Schottish dance and our glass of Sima.
Once established, these protected zones serve as highly effective jurisdictional barriers to foreign subsea maintenance. While environmental protection agencies claim to be strictly apolitical, their regulatory guidelines can be heavily influenced by national security objectives.
But of course, it's very biased. It instructs staffers not to use words and phrases that may be considered offensive. What's offensive? Founding fathers, man-made, and singular pronouns like he or her. Now, the Fed is controlling monetary policy. It's also totally destroying the economy, in case you haven't noticed. But right or wrong, it's supposed to be apolitical.
This subtle alignment of ecological standards allows states to quietly lock out rival infrastructure while maintaining complete diplomatic deniability. When nations fail to disclose the true scope of their subsea cable activities, host states can seek court orders to halt deployment.
Could seek a court order preventing Musk from voting shares he acquired without proper disclosure, but the SEC generally hasn't pursued that remedy.
This legal pressure forces rival networks to reroute their traffic through more vulnerable, heavily monitored channels. By ignoring standard conventions, regional authorities can selectively choose which subsea cable operators are allowed to land on their shores.
Law, in precedent, in anything convention, the governor has to invite the largest, single largest party. And there's still no explanation to why Vijay is not being invited, you know. And the role of governor, since you spoke about governor,
this highly selective process effectively funnels critical data traffic directly into corridors optimized for national surveillance. The coordination between national leadership and regulatory departments is critical when aligning environmental enforcement with maritime defense goals.
The relationship between the president or the White House and the Department of Justice, and what role, if any, the president and the White House should have in the department's investigatory and enforcement efforts, including prosecutorial matters. And then when we think about Article 3, a norm that's been discussed quite recently is perhaps the number of justices that sit on the Supreme Court. So these and many other make for really great discussion about.
This close alignment ensures that marine conservation boundaries are drawn in a way that maximizes underwater surveillance capabilities. When states file lawsuits to block cable partnerships, they often push standard regulatory frameworks far beyond their original intent.
That this transaction would be approved since our companies don't even compete with each other. But here we are. The government has filed a lawsuit, and it stretches the very reach of antitrust law beyond the breaking point.
AT&T will likely press for a court decision before April 22nd, the date before which both companies can leave the deal without penalty.
Using these legal maneuvers forces rival consortia to abandon strategic deals before their undersea projects can even launch. When governments treat an authorized undersea construction as an environmental violation, they can detain maintenance vessels under local maritime law.
Put in immigration detention and treated as a criminal. So I think that's the impact that those taking. But we're tarnishing our reputation as a country that is always welcoming and has a compassionate and humane nation.
What about the argument that there are legal channels and that's how people should try and come here?
This strict enforcement tarnishes the nation's open ocean reputation, yet it remains a highly effective tactic to stall rival networks, maintaining strategic dominance in the modern era relies heavily on the physical ownership and control of the actual Subsea networks.
Web3 different is the ability to own the actual network. And that's what crypto assets themselves represent, is an ownership stake in an underlying network. So when you hear people talk about, for example, layer 1 tokens, what they mean is this is your reward for providing the ledger maintenance services, the computing power to the network that on Web 1 and 2 was done by Google.
By claiming jurisdiction over the marine pathways, states ensure they control the physical ledger of global communication. Infrastructure projects that rely on public funding are highly vulnerable to selective regulatory challenges in federal and local courts.
Care worker who works in a facility that does receive federal funding through Medicare and Medicaid, and that's a whole lot of them, the majority of them. Those workers are not going to have a leg to stand on here, at least for enforcement in the time being. It could be that eventually, once the constitutionality of both of these issues is handled in the lower courts, it could be that there's an opposite decision.
Even if courts eventually clear a project, the years spent tied up in environmental litigation successfully neutralize the rival's momentum. When security agencies exert influence over presidential environmental directives, they can effectively shut down foreign cable permits.
Powers of the presidency. And the argument that you're going to shut down the government coming from Democratic members because of these policies is curious. I mean, the Democrats are threatening people that want less government with shutting down the government. That's like threatening a vegan that you're going to impose a beef ban. I mean, it's not going to be particularly effective.
These restrictive policies are designed to build silent, protective barriers on the ocean floor, preventing competitor access entirely. Under intense diplomatic and public pressure, states are often forced to take aggressive stances against foreign-backed Subsea projects.
And saying that they hate Israel and all Jewish people, which is extraordinary language against two US congresswomen. And really it does seem that Benjamin Netanyahu is doing this because of this pressure. You have to remember that his own ambassador to the United States, Ron Dermer, just last month said that this visit would go ahead.
By utilizing marine preservation laws, they can legally deny underwater access, satisfying national security demands without direct conflict. As states beta test new surveillance systems, they see physical control of subsea pathways to monitor communications on a global basis.
prison simply because they peacefully want to practice their faith. New technologies are being tried and beta tested to have a new form of persecution that's on a virtual basis. In the West, we see persecution for your faith is taking the form of exclusion and even prosecution for simply posting Bible verses. In Africa, religious adherents face massacres, and in Asia,
those who challenge these zones face strict administrative exclusion, leaving the host nation in complete control of the local seabed. When questioned about these aggressive maritime policies, official government spokespersons maintain a carefully crafted, eco-friendly narrative.
Law here.
Interesting. So have we heard from the former president?
Well, a spokesperson for the former president, Stephen Chung, said that
this public relations front successfully masks the strategic enclosure of critical underwater transit routes. Sovereign nations utilize their budget allocations to fund massive domestic marine monitoring and surveillance systems.
Under President Trump, only 3% of the debts, of the costs that we're dealing, only 3% have occurred under the Biden administration. This is largely under the Trump administration.
Democrats control the White House, the Senate, and the House. They want to raise $5 trillion and spend in the next month.
This significant investment secures their corridor monopolies, establishing cyber borders under the banner of ecological safety to maintain a legitimate and secure physical network. Analysts must constantly monitor how regulatory frameworks are used to exclude foreign states.
Alliance declares that only through election integrity can our American government operate according to its limited and legitimate role in civil society. And Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney is forced to give a defense for why she's bucking party lines and not supporting former President Trump. Top Republican leaders are rooting to replace her seat as conference chair. And Trump today fully endorsed another Congresswoman to replace her.
The future of undersea hegemony will not be decided by naval clashes, but by the quiet application of administrative law on the ocean floor. By determining who gets green permits, governments decide which alliances control the physical layer of the global internet.